Hello, everyone. This is Vance and Christy Goforth with A Voice for Joshua. We're going to be starting our Voices for Change interviews. So it's me and Christy here, and we're here with our friend Kia and Patience. Kia, if you want to give a little quick introduction here.
Okay, my name is Kia Neesmith, and I run Caregivers Connections, and because of COVID, we have not been able to function and have our meetings. So, Vance and Christy and I were thinking about how can we support our community and also letting our community know exactly what's going on in our families and our households. So we came up with this way. We're going to start a series of YouTube stories to just let you know what's going on in our communities and how we can, even in a virtual social media era that we are in, how we can assist and help each other.
Thank you, Kia. Tonight, we're going to be talking to Patience, Elsea, friend of ours. She has a very, very powerful story to tell. So welcome, Patience, and thank you for joining in on our discussions for change. Just give us a little background about Stephen and tell us about his diagnosis. What's the background with your son?
Right. Hey, thank you all for having me. I'm pleased to be able to share this story. As you guys know, it doesn't get shared enough. We kind of hide in the shadows. Stephen, he was born very early, had a fairly normal pregnancy until 23 weeks, and I got very sick, and Stephen was born by cesarean section, weighing 14 and a half ounces. He had a relatively uneventful NICU stay, came home on room air, did great physically. He had some fine motor delays, some gross motor delays, but he was overcoming and started to develop as expected. When he was about a year and a half old, all that changed. He started doing a lot of stimming, moving his head from side to side, exhibiting some behaviors that I thought were rather unusual. He stopped making any noise, any babbling. He didn't look at our face any longer. He was just totally disconnected from our family. He would still laugh, but it was all to himself. He was just playing within himself. We went to the doctor. The doctors assured me it was just a phase he was going through and he would grow out of it. And when he was 3 years old, our entire world changed. He became aggressive. He just completely no regard for any typical social behaviors. His only interaction with other children was to hit them. He did not want to play with them. He did not play with toys. And finally, at age 3, they started him on medication and diagnosed him with possible autism. And that's how our whole world turned upside down. So that's the beginning. That's the beginning. That was the beginning of an unusual life that we've called our own for several years.
And I want to.
You have a very similar. Go ahead, Kia.
I just want to point out that Patience is also in the medical field. You're a nurse, so it's not something that you knew exactly like what was going on with your son, and you're educated to know when something is wrong, and also you're probably you're more capable of caring for him than most families are, and still there were still there were still things that you needed help with, right?
I don't think there's anything that could have prepared our family for what was to come. But yes, I've been in healthcare my whole life and for over 20 years. And I never knew that there was a thing, severe autism.
Right.
The autism that we learned about during our psychiatric rotations and our childhood development was more of an Asperger's type, what some people like to call higher functioning, which is another totally misguided view of that. Autism in itself is, and Vance and Christy can speak for this, the children often appear just perfectly normal, for lack of a better term. And then all of a sudden, they process the smallest thing, a sound, and it's just totally out of nowhere. Reaction, severe, sometimes crying, sometimes yelling, trying to escape. I may be going ahead of the next questions that are going to come, but referring to what you said, I had no idea. I knew something was wrong, but we went to doctor after doctor after doctor that told us, oh, well, it's just because he's premature. He's having some delays. He'll be fine. He'll grow out of it. And he never did. He never, once he stopped babbling, when I say babbling, I'm talking mama, dada, very loose associations with just letter sounds. He never verbalized again until he started cooing and screaming and, just making random verbalizations that just really didn't have any meaning. It was very frustrating going through those first several years. His aggression increased. When he was 3, it was, oh, boys will be boys. But then in the same breath, he was at Siskin School for Children, Siskin Children's Institute. They were amazing. They were such a godsend. They were along by my side, no, you're doing the right thing. Keep fighting for this child. We're seeing different behaviors. And at age 4, he escalated behaviorally to the point he was hurting the other children, and he was not going to be able to attend there anymore. Even at that young age, he was attacking other children, pushing them down, and then, laughing and pulling their hair, not just in a playful way. He was very disconnected. And in that early childhood development, those interventions, that gave us an awesome support system. Unfortunately, when we left Siskin, we lost all of our support. All of it. I wish we could have stayed at Siskin's Children's Institute forever. That was the one simple time in our life.
Right. Yeah. Very, very similar situations that we had with Josh. You know his story. We've talked several times. The aggression, the building aggression, the attacks on other children. We experienced the same thing with Joshua. He would do it. He would laugh. He would tip over wheelchairs and laugh about the situation. Never could figure out the triggers. Triggers would change continually. He would elope. Aggression, self-injurious behaviors. So very similar, except we didn't face it till probably 9-10 years old is when he started escalating up to that point. So you faced it a lot earlier than we did. So we know now that around 3 or 4, you've seen the behaviors start and they start escalating. What point as you go through, as he's growing older, what point, patients, did you realize we're going to get to the point where we're going to have some support, resources, some services in place because it's getting to the point where we can no longer handle this? At what point did that happen?
when he was about 8. When he was about 8, he got, at first the behaviors weren't directed as much toward family members. He was still, he was disconnected in some ways, but he would still go through periods of where he would have some affection with us. He would sit next to us on the couch, even if he didn't interact with us. He was fairly compliant with things we asked him to do. We were never able to toilet train him. He just never would catch on to that. But he was, relatively compliant with personal care. And we were able to take him, places. He just had to be closely supervised. When he was 8, he started becoming very aggressive towards the family. He started hitting us. He developed strength that was just beyond what I could ever imagine for an 8-year-old. It was, I've been a larger woman most of my life, and at the time I was about 5'4", about 180, 190 pounds, and he just shoved me down like I was nothing, just moved me out of his way. And that became very concerning. I took him to the doctor to, does he have an infection? Is there something wrong? Is he hurting? And we couldn't find any physical reasons for that behavior. At that time, the doctor, I told the doctor, I can't handle this. I don't know what to do. I can't take care of him. I can't get him to take a bath. I need some help. So the doctor ordered home health for Stephen. Through Medicaid, we were able to get CNA workers to come in that were trained to do bathing and toileting, hygiene, dressing, assisting with him making up his bed and things like that. Very quickly, they realized that Stephen was like nothing they had ever seen before. He was very violent to the caregivers. He broke several noses, lots of skin tears and abrasions from scratching, throwing objects, behavior that, being in the medical field, I'm not sure how I could handle it being a caregiver. And we had a turnover rate of caregivers that was just unexplainable. We would have caregivers, some of them would not even make it through the first shift because he would be so violent. And we would go to the doctor, they would tweak his medicine a little bit. He would be okay for a couple of weeks. And as he got older, going and having his medicine tweaked is what they would call it. We're going to tweak it. We're going to make a little adjustment. That stopped working. And the behaviors rapidly got more intense. And it was a very surreal feeling. I was doing everything I can to fix it. Something's got to be wrong. He's got to be hurting. There has to be a reason for this. Excuse me. There has to be a reason for this behavior. At that point, I had no idea that families like ours existed, that that this diagnosis, this ASD3 diagnosis, along with there's a whole bunch of other letters. I'm sure Josh probably has all those, the whole alphabet behind his name too. He's got more credentials than most of his doctors. So, it was, we were isolated. There were no peers. Yeah. Stephen had no peers. There were no other families like ours. Well, it must be something that I'm doing as a parent. I'm not. So I started looking for ways to change my parenting. I started reading self-help books. And even though they had said possible autism, they never gave us that diagnosis. They said, well, maybe he's ADHD. Maybe he's bipolar. Maybe he's just going through a growth spurt. Over and over again, that's what we were told. And I started reading up on autism because I just felt like just some of the behaviors that he was doing, the environmental stimming, the shaking his head from side to side, wringing his hands, hitting his legs, spinning wheels on toys, and just interacting with toys and people just very differently than I'd ever saw a child do before. And as I was reading the books, none of them were like us. Some of the behaviors, as far as the stimming behaviors, were similar. The easily triggered meltdowns, that's a big term for all the autism parents, meltdowns, they get overstimulated, they throw a tantrum. And I saw these tantrums and meltdowns, but it was not anything like they were talking about in the books. It was far more dramatic than anything that I could ever imagine. I read parent book after parenting book, self-help book. I looked on the internet, and I had no clue. And the behaviors just kept escalating. And again, I would go to the doctor. There's no help available. Just be patient. This will go away. By this time, we were in public school system. That was a whole different challenge. They fought the diagnosis of autism. They didn't want him to have that diagnosis. They did everything they could to keep us from getting that diagnosis. We had several psychological exams through the school to get him an IEP set up, because he was still nonverbal at this point. He was not making any sounds, any attempts. But we knew immediately when he entered school that he needed extra support. And we started kindergarten in a public school at Saudi Elementary. They were very kind to us. They have a class primarily for children on the spectrum. And that's where Stephen was placed, in that class. And very quickly, like every other situation, Stephen did not fit in that class. He, within about 2 weeks, I was getting calls from the teacher and the principal that his behavior was disrupting the class, that he couldn't sit still through any portion of the learning instruction taking place in the class. He was hurting the other students. He was walking out of class. He was refusing to eat anything at school. And they offered us, by the end of that year, we determined that Stephen, they said he wasn't high enough functioning to be in a class that the public school system had designed for autistic kids. So we went to a multi-handicap classroom. That was the next level of help that we got.
But it was still in the same school.
We went to Red Bank Elementary at that point.
Okay.
We had beautiful teacher there. Her heart was so big. She blessed our family. She went above and beyond. The school system, it was very frustrating that he was placed there.
Right.
Now that I understand a little bit more about the different programs and classes within our Hamilton County school system,
right,
multi-handicapped classrooms tend to be for children that have more physical and medical disabilities rather than behavioral disabilities.
Right.
Stephen, he was small statured when he was younger. His body size was smaller, and that was a huge blessing because he had far more strength than his little body looked like it could produce. And he started, Vance had said, his Josh pushing over wheelchairs and things like that. Stephen, he would enjoy helping the other students, helping push the wheelchairs, but then he would at the same time want to push another child over that was in their wheelchair. So he was still being very aggressive. The rationale for putting him in the multi-handicap classroom, the school system's rationale for that was most of the children in that classroom were physically disabled and in wheelchairs, therefore did not require as much hands-on care.
So it was a
and that would
class.
free up time for the teachers to deal with Stephen.
Gotcha.
And it set the stage for a very dangerous, some very dangerous situations.
So in those situations, in those dangerous situations that you had, did you get additional support? Because I'm gathering that multi-handicap just did not work. And so after we figured that out, did you get additional supports?
We were at Red Bank Elementary for several years. He attacked the teachers. He attacked the principal. He attacked the other students. We had so many IEP meetings, I couldn't even guess to give you a number. At this point, I didn't know there was a such thing as a behavior plan. I didn't know that there was ABA, Applied Behavioral Services. I didn't know that was available. A functional behavioral assessment. I didn't know what that was. And so through networking with some other parents, that's been the biggest help.
Right.
That's been the only help for other parents.
Right.
Parents. This situation right here, you guys, the support that we can give to other parents, that's the only support that's available.
Right.
Through that support with the other parents, I asked for the functional behavior assessments and ABA services through the school, and they were implemented. We got what I asked for. We got the ABA services, we got the functional behavioral assessment, and we had a behavioral plan made, and that did not help. That they weren't trained. They did not have the proper training to recognize Stephen's condition. At this point, we still didn't have the diagnosis of autism. Even at this age, and at this point, he was getting close to his 8-year mark. And the straw that finally was the last straw at Red Bank Elementary, he pushed an elderly lady down and stepped on her, and he attacked a pregnant teacher, hitting her in the belly multiple times, and they had a difficult time removing him from the situation to protect her. We had tried some very strong as needed medications that the school nurse could give him, and they didn't work. So at that point, we were offered a slot at Orange Grove Center. Orange Grove Center, and you guys are familiar with it, but people watching may not be. It's a school exclusively for differently abled children, physically, intellectually, all disabilities are there. Stephen's classroom, he had peers that were very similar to himself, but did not have the level of violence that Stephen had.
Oh, okay.
He continued to hit the teachers, continued to hit the staff. Orange Grove did have some training and procedures in place to deal with these behaviors, restraints, and things like that you would see in an adolescent psychiatric facility. But still, Stephen's behaviors escalated. On the home front, outside of school, we still had CNAs. I had no idea there was anything else to ask for. Nobody ever, I'd taken him to doctor after doctor after doctor, psychologist after psychologist, psychiatric services. We had been to so many doctors, and, while we have these CNAs that can help you give him a bath, well, they would come for 4 hours, and it got to where when we could get one to show up, Stephen would have violent meltdowns getting off the bus. Immediately when he would come off the bus, he would start hitting the caregivers.
Right.
And frequently we couldn't get him in the house. He would just lay in the driveway and kick and scream and scrap and try to bite. And the days would just leave. We did finally find a few that were really, they hunkered down with us in the storm. And it was not because of any training that they had. It was because they had a big heart.
Right.
And
Right.
and I ended up paying them additional because they did it. I don't know that I could go through what they went through with my son for $10 an hour,
Right.
which is what most of them made. Some of them made $8.75 to maybe $10.50 an hour. And Stephen, even though he was maybe 3 foot tall, 3.5 foot tall, he was capable of taking a grown person to the floor. But still, there was, I went to the doctor, there was nothing else available. We went through so many agencies that fired us, for lack of a better term. Stephen, hurt their caregivers, and they just said, we can't do this. They called Adult Protective Services that I must be doing something wrong to teach him this behavior. I'm sorry, Child Protective Services. I think I said Adult Protective Services, but nonetheless, Government Protective Services. And even they came in and they were like, well, we're sorry, you're going through this. You're a good parent. We don't have any reason to take the child out of the home. But, even once, state welfare services got involved, there was still nothing that was offered to us
Right.
in the way of services. They were, well, good luck with this. And I'm like, you're supposed to be here to protect my child.
Right.
Okay, so I'm being
Yes.
a good parent, but I'm glad you're not going to take my child away, but he's still not safe. He's still hurting himself and others. By this time, Stephen had started hitting himself in the face. He would claw his face, claw his neck. Again, we're still right around this 8-9 year mark. We're getting on up a little bit closer to middle school age. We're 8, 9, 10 years old going through this.
So patients,
Finally,
when was the point where it got to a crisis level? At what point? Because this is very similar to Josh. We experienced the same type of episodes with Josh. We did have the same kind of. It got to the point with Josh we had to take him in homeschooling and do homebound because he was causing so much interruption at school, and there was injuries taking place. Where did you hit crisis level? What was the first time when that happened and you realized, okay, I'm going to have to start seeking more support, and we've got to have something? Where was that point? At what age and what level?
Our first experience with residential treatment was he spent his 9th birthday. He went in just before his 9th birthday. There was nowhere in Tennessee. We had to look outside of Tennessee. We ended up at a facility called Laurel Heights in Atlanta, Georgia. He had started attacking on us on a regular basis. It got to where we could not take him to the grocery store. He would pull stuff off the shelves, hit the staff. It was just constant. His behaviors, there was no break between them. From the time he would open his eyes until the time he would go to sleep, it was just constant violence, property destruction, refusing to change his brief, just nonstop. And so again, I called insurance, I had called the doctors, there was no help available. And and on my own, I started looking for schools for autism, looking for treatment programs, and I found Laurel Heights, and it was a process. It took us well over a month to get in, and he spent several months there, and they sent him home with virtually no changes to his medicine. Said he'd had no behaviors for a couple months, that he was fine, and they thought he was safe to return home.
Wow.
And we were good for a couple months. we were good for a couple of months, and then we weren't. We were right back to where we were, but worse. That was our first treatment, and so I'd found out that was our first inpatient treatment, and so I became aware that there were some things available. That was the easiest access that I had ever had to getting him somewhere, even though it took a month of all this behavior. That was the easy part, because after that, I would take him to the doctor. He would tear apart the doctor's office. There was about 6 or 8 months after he got out of residential, his behaviors had escalated again. I called the doctor. We'd taken him to a psychologist. We were actually seeing, at that point, we were still going to the Children's Institute for his psychological services, the Children's Institute at Siskin. And he had such a violent behavior at his doctor's office. His doctor actually had an intern with him, and the intern had to leave the room because she was afraid. And my son's pediatrician saw the behavior. Stephen was beating his head on the floor. He said, "Oh my gosh, he has a brain tumor." That's what he said. "We have to send him for some imaging on his head. He has a brain tumor. He has severe headaches. He has, something's horribly wrong." And, I said, "Well, I'm certainly open to exploring that, but I have to tell you, this is not new. This is what I've been telling you has been happening for years."
Right.
And we went through all of the physiological workup of brain scans. One thing we did find that was noteworthy: Stephen is missing most of his frontal lobe. I'm not sure about imaging with other children and adults, that fall into the severe autism category that Josh and Stephen fall into, but he is missing a large portion of his frontal lobe. There was no injury. There's no genetic history of that, but his frontal lobe was not developed. And for people that are watching that might not understand that controls executive function. A lot of your impulse control, right. Your empathy and things of that nature. So that made sense that, we were dealing with something that was far bigger than we understood to start with. And Stephen literally did not have the capability to control his actions. And we continued. At this point, we still had aid services that were in place, but we didn't have any staff. The agencies couldn't staff us. Right. We went back and forth to the doctor and still no help. Right. I actually reached out to Laurel Heights again. Our experience there is a whole nother interview that we could explore some other time if you would like. I'm sure there's several parents that would be willing to have that same interview.
Right.
I actually reached out to them again. Insurance doesn't pay for it, is what I was told. So I said, well, surely this has to get better. So we did more medication adjustments, just give him more medicine, give him more medicine, give him more medicine. And the medicines didn't work.
So Laurel Heights told you that insurance doesn't pay for it?
Yes. And I reached out to, at that point, I reached out to Blue Care, which was our HMO. It still is his HMO. And they said, he didn't qualify for residential treatment. His behaviors weren't severe enough. He hadn't had a need for acute psychiatric treatment. He just didn't meet the qualifications. Several years later, I found out what those qualifications were, and it involves a police car. That's the way you get help.
Wow.
You get a police car to come and get your child on their birthday after they beat their therapist for 20 minutes. That's what the qualifications are for getting what they call help. So that, I guess, is the real answer to your question, Vance. When did we really know that there was a problem? Everybody knew there was a problem on Stephen's 14th birthday. A couple of months before he turned 14, I had reached a point that I could not take it anymore. He had busted windows out of our home. I replaced it with plexiglass. He broke the plexiglass. We put Lexan over the windows. Those that don't know about Lexan, that's the most durable window covering that I could find. He broke that. We ended up with a thicker version of that. He started serious property destruction, pulling the surround off of our shower, jumping on our toilet until it came off the floor, pulling our fixtures off of our bathtub, causing water leaks, fecal smearing on his carpet, pulling doorknobs off. By this time, we had alarms on all the doors because he would run away. Locks on all of our cabinets. He would get into cleaning products, anything that he could pour out, get into. It was completely unbearable. Our house, thousands and thousands of dollars of damage. And this isn't including what he had done to me. I was in constant pain. He was hitting me nonstop. My son, I have an older son who was a teenager at the time. He was just pushing him down. We were bruised from head. Just to go through a daily activity. The school had got to where they were having issues transporting him on the bus. By this time, they had us picking him up across the street in a cul-de-sac because they couldn't pull in our driveway anymore because of some policy changes. He would try to run into a busy street. He was pulling mailboxes down. He was trying to run in other people's homes. So we went to his pediatrician said, take him to Children's ER. So I took him to Children's ER. And of course, this was the one time where he was being angelic. He gave the ER doctor a hug. He sat down. He was such a good boy. I was so proud of him for being so good. But I explained to the doctor the situation, and I said, this is what's happening at home. I, reiterated all the behaviors, told our story. So they admitted Stephen. The hospital setting, that was an issue. That there are no psychiatric beds for children, from what I was told. Right. We spent our time in the emergency room, 24-hour light all day long, with a glass door separating us from the nurse's desk. We were across from the nurse's desk for observation. 24-hour lights, 24-hour buzzers, 24-hour stimulation. Now, for a normal person, that makes it very difficult to sleep. For families like ours, that is a nightmare. Stephen did not sleep at all. He was aggressive. They called Youth Villages, is the crisis response team for children in our area. And they came and they looked at Stephen, and they said there was no placement for Stephen. There was nowhere for him to go. Right. And the doctor came in with discharge papers and said, well, there's nothing we can do for him. Wow. You have to take him home. While we were there, the staff had no idea how to take care of Stephen. I could not leave because I couldn't even leave to go to the bathroom. Right. There was no one to take care of Stephen. There was no one that understood him.
What would happen? What would happen if you went to the bathroom?
They ultimately, I had to leave to go to a doctor's appointment, and I requested staff to stay with them. They did have a nurse sit with him, and they called Child Protective Services on me for abandoning him because they said I refused to care for him. of course, this was devastating. I was reaching out to them for help.
Right.
Because I couldn't,
Exactly.
I didn't know what to do. I was reaching out for help. And at that point, I was grateful that they had called Child Protective Services again, not because I wanted to lose my child.
Document.
I didn't know what else to do.
Right.
I didn't know what else to do. And again, Child Protective Services came, and they, Stephen's well taken care of. They found him clean and fed, and fortunately, they found a happy Stephen. Stephen always he could be such a good boy sometimes. He was always a good boy, but he had some self-control at times. And he chose to use it when the Child Protective Services people would come. But it got to where they were so nice. It was like, can we do this by phone, or do you need to come by the house? It just got to where that was everybody's answer. Let's call Child Protective Services. Let's call Child Protective Services. At first, it would have. Yeah. I got to know them pretty well, and at first it was so upsetting to me because I was already doubting myself as a parent.
Right.
What have I done? What could I have done better?
Right.
Well, it ended up, we got discharged. We met with Child Protective Services. A couple of months later comes his 14th birthday. We had ABA services through the state, through TennCare. Adult applied behavioral services that were working with us to treat him, to work out plans for his behavior, work out a plan to deal with the violence, crisis plans. ABA is the answer to everything. That's no matter what happens with your child. When you have a child like Josh and Stephen, give them some more ABA therapy and some more medicine. But remember, Stephen doesn't have the portion of his brain that controls his self-control. So teaching him to do things to control his behavior was very difficult. We learned first and then that's a real popular thing with autism and behavioral therapy. First, you do the thing that the child is trying to get out of, bath, dressing, whatever. Then you get your preferred tablet, candy, whatever. That worked somewhat. It was pretty much, strategically bribing him. They did get us this particular day on his 14th birthday. We had one of the behavioral therapists go with us to his doctor's appointment. It had gotten to where I could not take him to an appointment without help. Excuse me, guys, I gotta get a drink here. We went through the meeting. Stephen was agitated this particular day. He had several behaviors at the doctor's office before. We saw a nurse practitioner. He was going to Agape Youth Behavioral Health Services here in Chattanooga, and they were very kind to us there. The practitioner that we had at that time, she was wonderful. She did everything she could to help us. She didn't understand the level of autism that Stephen had. Even his healthcare providers, a lot of times, were perplexed by him and didn't know what to do with him. This day, we're planning to go for a lunch. We had our therapist with us. Like I said, we were getting ready to leave. He'd been a little agitated, and out of nowhere, he started to attack his therapist, hitting her, pushing her. He went into his property destruction. He broke furniture in the psychiatrist's office. He tore all the books, threw the toys, and he attacked the therapist over and over again. Fortunately, her only injuries were bruises all over her legs, thighs, stomach, back. The actual psychiatrist came in at that point. The police were called to intervene. Stephen had became he calmed down somewhat, and he cooperatively got into the police car, and we were taken to the emergency room. He went to Park Ridge East. He went to Park Ridge East. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Went to Park Ridge East. They were great to us there. We actually, the providers there were very sensitive to what we were going through. They didn't understand it. The provider there actually, she had told me she had never worked with a child like Stephen. They gave him Risperdal. That was the first time we had Risperdal. It calmed him down, and he rested. Again, they called youth villages. Again, youth villages came. Sorry, there's nowhere to place him. You're going to have to take him home.
Right.
And no, no, I can't take Stephen home. I can't do that. I'm afraid, he's going to hurt somebody. He's already hurt somebody. I can't do this anymore. I don't know. I have to have some help. Well, you can stay here a few more days and we'll see if the place opens up, but there's nowhere to get help for him.
Right.
There's nowhere in Tennessee. And I said, well, I know there's a place in Georgia. So reached out to Laurel Heights, and he was sent to acute psychiatric services. And he was there for a couple of weeks and then transferred to residential again. He was there from June until October. They adjusted some medicines and sent him home. Very quickly, he came home on a Friday. He was agitated on Saturday. By Sunday, we had the police at our house again.
Now, how old was he at this time? This was 14?
At this time, Stephen was 14 years old at this time. Okay. This was actually last year. This was last year. Okay. Last year. So they sent him home in October. The first weekend he was home, we had the police to come and intervene because he was trying to run away, and he was hitting us, and we physically couldn't keep him in the house, keep him from running into the street. So we calmed down. The police left. We started him back in school at Orange Grove School. The first day, immediately he started attacking the teacher, attacking the other peers. He was flipping over bookcases, tables. He turned over a cafeteria table, throwing food at other students. And the teacher that he had at that time, he targeted her. And he attacked her multiple times. He had restraints, physical restraints, multiple times. I requested an IEP meeting to reevaluate his behavior plan. They did set one up, and the restraints for what they had to offer. I requested one-on-one assistance for Stephen, and I was told that was not a possibility. I knew better, that there were cases that children did get one-on-one aids during school, but I was told that was not an option. But unfortunately, he was not able to be at home very long. We were home for 3 weeks. We had the police at our house several times. The last time the police were at our house, he attacked the police officer. He beat the police officer, pulled his vest, hit him over and over again. And I have to say, the police officer was the kindest individual I think I have ever encountered during this crisis that we've called life. He was very compassionate. And he said, Mom, I'm going to have to call an ambulance. Your son is not safe. He said, you're not safe. You're doing everything you can do. That meant so much to me that somebody else saw what I saw, and they told me that it wasn't my fault, that I was trying.
Right.
I'm sorry, I don't want to cry on you. I don't want to cry on you guys, but having somebody acknowledge that I was doing everything I could, and Stephen needed help, it was life-changing for me. that somebody else knew that I needed help, because I just felt like over and over again, here's medicines, here's CNAs, here's this. I can't, I don't know why this isn't working for you. It should work for you.
Right. And so many were saying that nothing was wrong for so long. And so
Yeah.
I can understand, how that really would mess with your psyche as a mother.
Yeah.
It was unimaginable. It was unimaginable. I the self-loathing, the emotional impact this had on me. I'm not sure that I'll ever recover from it. The police officer did call an ambulance, and Stephen went to the emergency room. He was restrained in the ambulance. I think that was the hardest day that I'd ever had in my life. Seeing my 14-year-old little boy strapped to a stretcher. It was surreal. It was surreal. I just broke down and I started to cry. And that officer just put his arm around me, and I think I cried on him for what felt like an eternity. I almost couldn't move at that point.
Right.
It was like the 14 years came crashing down when I saw him strapped to that stretcher. This is not okay. Nobody can tell me that this handful of pills, by this time it was literally a handful of pills that I was giving him. It was a handful of pills. And all these services. Now, rewind just a little bit. By this time, we had been offered choices, ECF choices by this time.
That was what I was going to ask you.
Yes. This all transpired while we were on choices. Choices was even less help than anything we had ever been offered. In our area, there are no support services, the agencies that provide personal assistance. None of those agencies take children, or so we were told. If you're under 18, too bad, so sad. Mom, you should be able to deal with this.
Wow.
We had, and actually, one of the agencies that fired us called TennCare and said, look, this situation's out of control. This family needs some help. And they got us enrolled in choices. It was fairly quick. They sent us a case manager who was a really sweet lady. She would come every 6 months, every few months, and ask what medicine Stephen was taking. Had we been to the doctor? Ask us why we weren't using our funds that we had available to pay caregivers. And see Stephen melt down, and then she would leave.
Wow.
After I would explain to her, listen, I'm offering $15 an hour, which is the most you will allow me to pay these people. I cannot get somebody to show up at my house and stay for more than 2 days. We can't do this. He's too violent. Okay, well, I'll see you again in a few months. Call me if you need anything.
No remedy at all.
That's how it works. That's how it works.
No. And I actually went beyond our case manager. I went several levels up the chain of command with the Choices program. There was no help. We were on Choices while this behavior was escalating. They would get us more applied behavioral analyst services.
Same exact story that we've got patients. We've talked several times. They'll come in, meltdowns start happening right in front of your caseworker. They leave. They don't want to be there when the behaviors start. Yep. There's nowhere to send them. You can have all the funding in the world, but nobody's going to come in. They'll tell you straight up. They'll say, we are not going to put our people in there where they're going to get hurt, is what we heard over and over and over and over.
And at the amount of, at the level that Stephen was on, our stipend was, I think, $1,500 for an entire month. And I'm a single mom working full time. And I had my older son, thank goodness. He lost most of his childhood. Going through this hell alongside of me. And I think he will probably bear this burden forever. So when we finally ended up going that night, I went to the hospital. I met Stephen there. We're going back to the ambulance ride again.
Right.
This was the most frustrating experience. I know I made several posts on support groups and things. Stephen was attacking the doctors, attacking the nurses. He was so violent when I got to the hospital, I couldn't actually go back and see him. I could see where he was, but I couldn't go into the room with him. The violence went on for a couple of hours. They gave him injectable sedation.
Wow.
None of it worked. He was the level of violence. He was hitting himself. His face was bruised. The level of violence was even surprising for me at this point. Finally, all of the sedatives kicked in and Stephen went to sleep.
Oh, okay.
Youth villages came again. Youth villages came again and told us there was nowhere to place Stephen.
Are you serious?
Since he had just got out of residential care and it obviously didn't work, insurance was not going to pay for him to go back, and I needed to take him home.
Right.
I cried. I could not even say a word. I just cried. I just cried and cried and cried and cried and cried. And the youth villages worker walked out of the room with me sobbing hysterically. And finally, I pulled myself together and I went out there and I said, no, I am not taking him home. I'm not. Do what you got to do. Call Child Protective Services. Call the state. I don't care. This child is going to hurt someone. I said, he's going to hurt himself.
Right.
We have to have help.
Right.
Well, wait till in the morning and I'll call 10 Care. There's nobody there. I said, okay. We were so blessed. Park Ridge East took such good care of us. They stood by my side. 10 Care fought tooth and nail for him to not go to residential. It didn't work before. Why should we pay for it again? And over again, I called our caseworker. I called everybody at 10 Care that would listen. I kept calling customer service. No, I've already talked to that person. Send me to somebody else. No, I've already talked to somebody. I got all the way up to a lady, Patty Killingsworth, with 10 Care, and she didn't return my emails. I started emailing her. I couldn't reach her by phone. I called her. No, I started emailing her. No response. Nothing. That was as high as 10 Care as I could get anybody. It was Patty Killingsworth.
And how long did this go on that you were emailing her?
I was frantically emailing and calling everyone that I could think of for 9 days.
And nobody responded.
Nobody. They were telling me I have to take him home, except the ER physician. The ER physician stood by my side. No, we're not discharging this child. He's not safe. We're not sending mom home. Well, of course, there's no psychiatric beds for children on the level that Stephen requires in Tennessee. Valley, those kind of places, they don't accept children like Stephen and Josh. They can't handle the level of violence in combination with the infantile behaviors and the lack of independence with things like toileting. They don't take anyone that's incontinent. That's another issue. If you have a family member, a loved one under the age of 18, and they're not toilet trained, you're not getting help. You're just not. It's not going to happen. Nowhere will touch him. Nowhere will touch him. After 9 days, finally, I got, I believe Vance sent me a contact to Miss Kennedy. And I talked with her. She was at 10 Care. I'm not even sure what her title is. Vance, you can chime in if you know her title. I think I talked to so many people at 10 Care. The names are just, I look at my list, and the notes that I made during this time period were just a chaotic mess. It reflected our situation of what we were going through.
Right.
I was finally able to get Stephen back in Laurel Heights. Now, rewinding back, I mentioned our first experience at Laurel Heights was bad. Part of that was weight loss. They didn't give him proper food. They would not let him have access to his Pediasure. The first admission, Stephen primarily lived off Pediasure. He took it orally and not through a feeding tube, but he didn't eat enough food to sustain him. Rewind to the admission prior to this ER stay, from June to October. Stephen had lost a lot of weight at Laurel Heights. He was anemic. Everything you hear about the institutions for children, all of those horror stories, it's true. It's true. Every bit of it is true. I was so desperate. I had no other choice. When they offered to go back to Laurel Heights, I had to take it. And he went back to acute before he went to residential. He was in the acute unit for 8 weeks. They weren't able to stabilize him. Even in acute psychiatric setting, they were not able to stabilize him. Yet they were telling me he needed to come home from the emergency room. The third night he was in the acute unit at Laurel Heights, the staff called and told me that he was being violent and attacking the staff and refusing the shower. And they asked me how I handled this at home. Could I offer them some helpful advice? I said, well, I usually call the police. That's what I have to do. That's why he's there, is I don't know what to tell you. But I got multiple calls from the acute psychiatric unit at Laurel Heights asking what they should do for this behavior. So, I just found it very, it was disgustingly comical. That even an acute psychiatric unit that's supposed to be designed for violent autistic children could not handle him. But the answer when I took him to, when he was taken to the emergency room, strapped to a stretcher,
send him home.
I was told to bring him home. Bring him home.
Right.
And it took, after 7 weeks, they started telling me they wanted to discharge him from the acute unit at Laurel Heights to home. And I said, no, I'm not going to come and get him. I'm not. I'm not. He's still attacking your staff. You're still calling me on a daily basis, telling me you don't know what to do with him. I'm not. Well, we're going to call Child Protective Services.
Here we go again.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, I haven't met the one in Georgia yet. But I have some friends, that are in child welfare in Tennessee, and they said that's a different animal when they're across state lines and that starts happening.
Yes.
Well, fortunately, it didn't come to that point. Stephen ended up getting transferred to residential. After battle after battle after battle, and email after email after email to anyone and everywhere in Care that I could send an email to. In Blue Care, I sent hundreds of emails. So they kept him. They kept him again in residential until April of this last year.
Mhm.
He was still having behaviors after behaviors after behaviors after behaviors. He was still violent, hurting the staff, hurting the other clients. He's reached his max potential. He's as good as he's going to be. He's as good as he's going to be. And I said, what am I supposed to do with that? You know, I can't take care of him. Is there somewhere that he can be placed? There's nowhere like that. They're all full. There's nothing. And I tell you, this is the part where God showed up. This is the part where God showed up. God showed up a lot of times. God showed up because I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today with a somewhat sound mind. But God showed up in a big way. I had made several posts on Vance's support group, and a lady that I still have not met to this day has become one of my dearest friends, reached out to me. And she said, I can help you. There is help available. It's very limited, and pretty much someone that's in the group homes has to die for you to get a space. That's there are a few group homes, and they are so limited that literally you have to wait for someone to die to get a space. And fast forward through a very emotional story, Stephen finally did get a placement at Open Arms Care, and they've been wonderful to him. It's been a godsend once we finally got the help we need. But there are so many families. Unfortunately, someone did die at the right time. And that's a terrible, that feels so terrible to say that. Fortunately for Stephen, someone died. And that is what it has to come to. That is what it looks like to get help for a severely autistic child and family. It has to involve someone dying for a slot to open up. It has to involve restraints and police officers for a child. It involves multiple people being injured, the financial devastation for our family, home repairs, loss of work hours, the devastation that had to happen before we got help.
Patience, I know that the support structures are just not there across the nation to help you with this. And with everything that you've went through, you think that would have been a red flag for someone at Blue Care, Ten Care, ECF Choices. You would have think that would have been a red flag that, hey, this system is not working. With what areas do you want to see improvement and changes made in?
Well, the biggest thing, there needs to be full-time care available for these children. Their in-home support services, that would be beneficial, but it's not plausible. It's not sustainable. It's not safe. Maybe when Stephen was younger and smaller, maybe at that 8-year, 7, 8, 9-year mark, in-home services would have been helpful. It would have prevented the inevitable that he would need long-term housing. But there needs to be institutions in Tennessee that can provide acute psychiatric care to keep our Tennessee tax dollars in Tennessee.
Right.
And to have access for parents to be interactive in their child's therapy. I would have to drive 2 hours one way, 2 hours home to participate in a therapy service with my child, to do therapeutic outing, 4-hour round trip. And the way it's set up now, the family cannot be involved in any kind of psychiatric care that the child needs. So first off, we need acute psychiatric services.
Mm-hmm.
We need outpatient services. There are community health centers that are designed for adults. Indigent community mental health is the only option, and they don't typically see a lot of children. They don't see any children like Stephen. There's not very many of us, it seems like. I was told there's only 13 of us, and that's why there's no services available. Of course, I personally know more than 13 families, and from what I understand, they've been told that magic number of 13.
Oh, yeah.
But there are a number of families. There needs to be an institution that can provide acute stabilization. There needs to be a residential long-term therapy center that is available, one on each end of the state. There are definitely enough of us that could support
Exactly.
2 facilities.
Right.
There needs to be long-term care available. Institutions have gotten a bad name, and I understand after being at Laurel Heights, it was a nightmare. And like I said, there's a whole series that we could probably do with parents that have been there. But group homes, institutions, there needs to be a place like where Stephen is now. He lives in a home with 8 other individuals that are like himself. Stephen and one other young man that is 16 are the most severe behaviorally, but they will put one-on-one staff with Stephen. And they frequently have since he's been there. He's been there. He was able to be placed right after his discharge with Laurel Heights. But there needs to be homes that are close to the families. We live in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Stephen's in Antioch. It's more than 2 hours away. For me to go visit Stephen, it's 4 to 5 hour round trip for me to go visit him. And fortunately, he's there. That's the closest possible place that he could be to me. But the way it's set up, there's no provision for family involvement. There needs to be long-term care available for these individuals. There needs to be long-term care at an earlier age. I wanted to keep my son at home more than anybody. Children need to be with their parents. Parents are always the best, but sometimes parents being the best
is not enough.
Means they need other support.
Yeah.
And that means
Yes.
keeping the child in a place where they're safe,
Right.
where they can, have multiple staff available around the clock, multiple safety accommodations in place. Long-term care. We need acute, intermediate, and long-term care for children with severe autism and violent behaviors in Tennessee. And we need for TennCare to listen to us. We need for TennCare to listen to us.
That's the most important thing, because it doesn't seem like they are.
Right. There's several of us out there, and patients, you've talked about it there just a little bit, but you're the one that started #MoreThan12.
Right.
And the reason patients started that is because we're another family. It was told that Kia, the story behind patients, the story behind Josh, it's the same.
It's the same story.
It's just a little bit different, but it's the same situation. again, with Josh, he has damage to his frontal lobe.
Mm-hmm.
We know this. We know what's causing the issues, and it's compounded by everything else that he has to deal with,
Mm-hmm.
all the other diagnoses, and they cannot process, they cannot control these behaviors. But for the state to look at families and say, well, there's only 12 families per year dealing with this, that blows my mind.
Or to say with our tax dollars that it's nothing we can do, you got to take your baby home. When law enforcement has said, I can't let him stay here, it's not because parents don't want to be parents, it's just for the nature of safety. And I don't understand why that's so hard to get. That is for safety reasons. And the traumatic discourse that you guys go through for it is unbearable. And I just don't understand how we can't get this fixed.
Well, I will say this. When our situation spiraled out of control with Josh, and we ended up in the hospital, a social worker come in and asked somebody in the state program that we're involved with,
mm-hmm.
why does this family not have the services and resources they need?
Right.
Now, it had been documented over and over and over. I guess it was a cover your rear end type statement.
Right.
But what said, Kia, to that social worker was, this family's hard to deal with and they won't follow through on anything. And we were crying and begging daily, begging, sending emails, making phone calls daily saying, somebody's going to get hurt bad. He's hurting himself. I mean, at that point, Josh had broke his teeth off. And what bothers me the most is when we finally got Josh he's in residential now in Orange Grove, and it's been wonderful. It's been what he needed. We finally got the help. But what got me was after everything was said and done, someone looked at us and said, we had no idea it was this severe. They were shown videos. They seen the outburst firsthand. The excuses, we can no longer have these excuses.
No.
The state knows what's going on. They've been told, and there's more of us out there than what they're saying. It's time to get this changed.
So we definitely just need to keep talking about it and keep telling these stories, because somebody needs to do something about this. This is getting out of hand.
It is. When patients met me, we sat down for, what was it, 2.5, 3 hours?
Yeah.
And just discussed things. And it was like it was the exact same situations. It's almost verbatim the things that was said to us was said to patients. It's the same excuses. It was the same delays.
The look when I said the number 12 to Vance, I'm not sure who dropped the first tear. I'm not sure who dropped the first tear. Like, oh my gosh, somebody else has been told this. I was one of those mothers. I complained and I didn't follow through, and it was all my fault that I wasn't getting this. And I think that I don't know if my butt had hit the chair before Vance and I both had tears in our eyes.
Right.
Because, as soon as we started talking, it was like, oh my gosh, there are more of us. And then, I found his support group, and I was like, oh my gosh, there's a whole lot of us.
Right.
There's a lot of us. And I'll tell you what we're hidden. We're hidden because we can't go anywhere.
No. We
can't go to support groups. We can't take our children to community ball games and Special Olympics and things where other exceptional families meet and network.
Right.
We can't network. We don't have a way to network. We're prisoners in our homes.
Right. And
my husband, he actually, at one point before we found his placement in Open Arms, my husband said, honey, you're building him an enclosure. This isn't safe. This isn't a bedroom. It's a cage. And I looked at it, and everything was gone in the room except things that were bolted down. he had bulletproof Lexan on his windows. We had no doorknobs. We had alarms. We had, chains on the cabinets. And we couldn't leave the house. We literally could not leave the house. I would work as much as I could while he was at school and come home. I could not have done it without my older son. And he made so many sacrifices, but even he missed out. We couldn't be in the public for the public to see us, right, to know it's a problem, because we can't physically take our children out. Nobody knows we exist. And when we do get them out, it's uncomfortable. People don't want to see a child like that. Mm-hmm. People don't want to look. It's easier to just not look at it.
Yes.
So, we don't have access to network like other families with different abilities.
Right.
That's a big thing. So, Vance, I appreciate you. Kia, I really appreciate you. I hope that, the hashtag, I haven't figured out everything that to do with that yet, but that just needed to be somewhere on the internet for somebody to see that there are more than 12 people.
Well, we're going to slap it everywhere. We would definitely slap it everywhere, because there
are more.
Yeah, because we could easily set up at least 20 interviews next week alone, in Tennessee. Just in Tennessee.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that hashtag, anybody that watches this video, if you have a story, hashtag, you can find me through that hashtag, Patience Elsea,
mm-hmm.
Voice for Joshua, Caregivers Connection, reach out, that hashtag, more than 12, hashtag it, tag your stuff, tag your story.
Right.
Because my guess is this is happening in other states. Actually, I know it is, because Voice for Joshua has went global.
Yeah.
It's went global. It's not just Tennessee. It's a lot of places.
Right.
And there's
it's not just in the States. Am I right?
It's not just the States.
Right.
It's everywhere.
Right. We're getting stories out of Ireland, the UK, Australia, we've got in all the states where as far away as Alaska, Mexico. It's happening everywhere.
It's happening everywhere. Vance, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just want to end everything by saying thank you, Patience, for sharing your story. We know this is hard. Especially me and Christy, because that was one of the hardest things when we first started A Voice for Joshua, was having to get it all out there in the public, because we were so private. We know how hard it is to share these stories, and we know that they're hard situations, and we want to just thank you from the bottom of our heart for you doing this, because we know it's not easy. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. And Kia, we appreciate you so much. You've helped us so many times. We appreciate your support and helping. And to everybody else that watches this video, I want you to think about what's been talked about here tonight. I want you to get involved, get everybody else involved, share the videos, tell other people about it. We're going to be posting them on a YouTube channel. They'll be on our page. Please get involved. It's going to take many voices, but we're going to get this changed. We're going to keep on until our voices are heard. I'm part of the National Council on Severe Autism now. We're starting a policy committee. We'll be doing some things with that. I can't share everything about that right now, but we're going to be pushing